Hi, I'm Rigger. This is your right, and today we're looking back. Before that though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else if you'd like it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. So today, I'm getting something off my chest. Legitimately, it's something I thought they were actually going to do in RWBY, that I had every intention of making a theory about before they got to it during Volume 8. But then, things were very busy video-wise, I was making a lot of stuff at the time, and by the time I found a spot to make it, Hazel was already done and dusted. But I will say, there is a chance they still technically do this, like they reveal it was a thing. But even if they do it now, it loses a lot of impact from what it could have had. This is less a theory or idea because everything lines up perfectly, but that it plays into the story that could have been. Like, if Oscar was down here with them, and it's the afterlife, maybe you could also do this, but he's not, so that's also not going to happen. And I'm assuming you've all seen the title, you know what I'm talking about. The idea is, yeah, Hazel is Oscar's father. Basically, look, it's no secret, Hazel is kind of my pet project. I've done a couple videos now where I put a lot of work into trying to make Hazel just more. Not just because he's lacking, but because there was so much potential, so many things left blank, so many things we could have done. So, after Hazel's death, I basically just put this in the scrap folder because I thought it no longer mattered. But then I was just thinking, why not? It's an idea, it's fun, there's no reason not to go into this, what could have been. And if you guys like this one, I might even do a few more of these that I've had to set aside in the past before, we'll see. But for now, yes, Oscar Rainart. So the reason this came about is that, as you all probably know, to a degree at least, the more you find connections between characters, oftentimes things just simply feel nicer in a plot. I mean, it is in a balance to be sure, you don't want to go too far with it. If everyone is absolutely connected all the time, it does feel silly. You get kind of a Star Wars thing where everyone has to be someone's kid, to be someone important, etc, etc. That happens all the time, and it's just not great. But tactical placement of connections feels great in narrative, when it's earned, or when it makes sense, or when you weren't expecting it. And there's one here that's vague enough that I thought you really could have done it. So we all know what I'm getting at. Before we do the story, we'll do the evidence. Like I said before, there's not the strongest evidence where this has to be a thing, but there are lots of things that line up that mean it could be. First up is making sure the ages work, and it does. I've done this math before, better in other videos, but just quickly. Physically, it's hard to tell how old Hazel is. He doesn't have any grey in his hair, but you could easily dye it, and he is a physical specimen, so his body doesn't give away a lot. Given his voice and skill, you'd expect him to be older. To me, saying he's anywhere in his 30s or 40s is fair, and 50 might be pushing it. In canonical material, Gretchen has been referenced as not just his sister, but his twin, so he's the same age as she would be. She enrolled at Beacon, with nothing to suggest she was something special like RWBY getting in early or anything. Yeah, Hazel calls her a child, but he considers all the others children too, like Nora, etc. So, that'd be Gretchen at 17 to enroll, meaning Hazel was 17 when she enrolled. She died on a training mission, so that's any time in the next 4 years after that. He says Salem came and found him, and he killed her over and over again when she did. Hazel himself was not enrolled, so he probably needed time to develop his combat abilities to the point where he would be a threat to Salem or someone Salem would want on her team. Headcanon was probably he was training to kill Oz in revenge, which led to Salem finding him at all. So that's minimum 17, plus a few years to train probably. Importantly, people like Crow do not react to Hazel, but obviously Oz does. But Oz doesn't say he works for Salem straight up, simply that he's from Oz's past after they first encounter him with Oscar. Basically what I'm saying is, isn't it weird that after they saw Hazel at the train station, that Oz didn't warn Crow that one of Salem's agents was around? Probably because at that point he didn't know he was Salem's agent and didn't realize that until he turned up at Haven. He's just someone from Oz's past he had a problem with. If he was a known quantity under Salem, there'd be no reason to keep that from the team, nor would there be a reason to keep that from Team Stark while they were operational doing missions for Oz, so they would have known about him if it was important, even aside from the plot we saw. So presumably, those events probably took place before Team Stark. That the Gretchen incident and the incident with Hazel that came after it presumably happened before Team Stark was a thing working for him, so there was no reason to tell them because Oz thought it was dealt with. Since he does know Hazel's combat ability too, they probably had a fight and Oz didn't kill him, perhaps thinking he was simply misguided and hoping for the best. Simply dealt with him and figured he was gone for a very long time until he crops back up at the train station. Seeing him again at that train station, he is wary, but no warning to people like Crow or Oscar that Salem's agent, so presumably he doesn't know those facts. Then when you consider the math that's been done previously on people like Raven and Crow, Team Stark come in at around their early 40s. When you do their math, this puts Hazel at about their age, if slightly older, meaning he can clock in at around 44, 45-ish easily and it would all work. You might say this might have happened after Team Stark all broke up and went separate ways, but Crow was still working for Oz and still had no idea who Hazel was. Or at least there was no indication that he knew anything about him from anything that we saw. So you take the math that puts Hazel in about his mid-40s, and you given that Oscar is 14 at the story's start, or at least when we meet him, be generous and say it's 15 years with pregnancy time. That 15-year gap easily fits into the gap of Hazel's life between the Gretchen happening at 17 to 20-ish and the 45 years now, meaning that in order to be Oscar's father, this relationship would have had to take place when he was about 30 years old, and that's certainly possible. Next, we'll analyze physical appearance. Okay, Hazel is massive and Oscar is not. This is true, but it's also kind of funny if that were the case on like a plot level, which is not science, but on a writing level you might put that in as almost a joke, which makes sense. But also, on a science level, Oscar is just a kid, so there's no fair comparison. Hazel has worked out a ton, his body is very developed, so it's not a fair comparison to say their sizes don't match. He doesn't seem to have Hazel's height, but there is another unknown quantity, which is the mother, who we have no reference for and whose genetics we have absolutely zero read on. And there could be a lot of effect in this. So don't forget, when there are discrepancies, some of these things could easily be made up by the genetic input of the completely unknown mother. When we get around to the hair, yes, Oscar's is a touch darker, but it's still brown and not a black. The eyes are pretty much identical though, both have a green. Oscar's are a bit weird because they have a thing with Oz there that they seem to be playing with some brown in them and the green changes. But yeah, they both have brown hair and green eyes on a base level, although the tones are slightly different. The skin tone is a little off, but Hazel reads as someone with more of a big, heavy tan of many, many years on a slightly darker skin pigment. And obviously, being that it is animation, we have to recognize that it can sometimes be difficult to know what skin tone, skin pigment, and tan and things like that are going on with everyone, since it's just a base color. But going to Oscar, he is noticeably paler, and he works on a farm too, so you'd assume he would have some tan for his skin tone, so that doesn't quite match. But again, the mother's skin tone is completely unknown here, so we're still very much in the possible range. And by the way, don't get me started about dominant genetics on Remnant. Somehow mixing Ty and Raven, Yang came out blonde, so you put your Punnett squares away. But physically, the hair is slightly different, but in the same color range, certainly possible. The eyes are basically identical. The skin tone is negligible, and for build it's simply not a fair comparison because of the massive age and experience difference and bodywork difference that's gone into someone like Hazel. And like I said, all of that is negated by the completely unknown factors of the mother and the weird way genetics seem to work on Remnant anyway. But even with dominant genetics, if those were a thing, if the mother had darker hair, pale skin, a slight build, an average or below height, and light eyes of perhaps a blue or green, this is still very much possible. But this is a show, it is not a science class, so we also have to look at thematics. We're going on writing and presentation. First off, obviously they both wear a green, which in a show with such heavy color theming to everything is not nothing, it's not something to just write off. Even the belted green coat with a high collar of Hazel's original design is very much like Oscar's combat gear design. They're quite similar, really. As for presentation on a combat side, both of them favor melee combat enhanced by outside factors, and that includes Oz's magic for Oscar and Hazel's dust. Yes, it's true that in story, Oscar gets his whole combat style from Oz and he's meant to fight Hazel, so they're meant to be similar, but on a thematic level there's still similarities of presentation there, and sometimes it is possible for something to be two things at once. From a writing perspective, it also lines up too that Oscar by far has the most interaction with Hazel. Again, yes, this goes along with the fact that Hazel's plot primarily focuses around Oscar because of Oz, but it wouldn't be a stretch to line that up as a secondary element as well. I mean, in the theory he's his father, the literal first thing Hazel does on screen with Oscar is help him out and then give him life advice. And on a writing level, they're both introduced in the same volume, basically at the same time, at the time where we're broadening the world of RWBY, so the stories happen alongside each other anyway. But on that note, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that Hazel knows this, not at all. It's not a child he's abandoned on purpose either, it would be something that happened without his knowledge. Now I know that it's painting in broad strokes, but let's just cover the massive gap where this could have happened. All that needs to happen is for about 15 years before the story starts, for Hazel, who we know travels around doing missions for Salem, and it seems likely would be active during that time, that he passes through Mistral at some point and simply has even a one-night stand with Oscar's mother. That's very, very easy to consider having happened. And I can understand that there would be a lot of people that would say Hazel wouldn't do that, he's not that type of person, he doesn't seem interested in those things. Maybe. But we don't know him 15 years ago, and saying that he never showed any interest in any kind of relationship at any point in his life, even just for the pleasure aspect of it, even in passing at any time, is a very broad assumption to make, no matter how broody and sad he is generally. And for all we know, that plays into it. He might have been drowning his sorrows one night at a bar in Mistral and things just happened. Who knows? But skipping forward to things we do know, it may not be much, but Hazel and Oscar crossed paths, presumably not too far from Oscar's home. We don't know exactly how long he travelled, but he was still travelling pretty well on foot on his own, so within walking distance of his home within the day. He did set out in the morning and arrive in darkness, but it was also cloudy and raining, so is that darkness night? We have no idea. But what that tells us is presumably that the train station is somewhere around the general vicinity of his house. So seeing that there's an active travel hub there, if that travel hub was also there 15 years ago, and let's say there's a town nearby and a barn nearby or whatever else it might have been, to say that Hazel's come through here before would just be pretty reasonable to say. But also, it's the convenient thing in this that for no real reason that serves any purpose, we don't know anything about Oscar's parents. They don't have names, they don't have faces, they've never been talked about, and his aunt isn't even seen on screen or given a name. For all we know, the aunt is actually the mother and simply said he belonged to her sibling because she was perhaps ashamed or something of having a baby under those circumstances. Who knows, I'm completely making this up, but it all could be. Or yeah, he was left with her after the mother left or died. There is no reason so far that Oscar couldn't have just had his parents, or that the voice off screen be his parents, or anything else, or talk about his parents, or give them names, or have a photo. We haven't done anything. Why not? Why are we withholding that from the story? Why did we choose to go this way? I don't know, but it does leave a lovely convenient gap that we could fill with someone like Hazel to be something. But honestly, beyond all of this, it just fits into the entire theme of Hazel's plot. Here's where we'll move into story stuff. Before I get started, what I'll say is this. I think there's a chance this is still the truth, that they are doing this reveal sometime later, but now they're just going to do it long after Hazel is dead. Perhaps Oscar has to feel a certain way about it in retrospect, or sometime in the future he gets a chance to speak with Hazel's spirit somehow through some kind of magic. Who knows? We have no way of knowing what's coming in the future. But since he's already dead, it is a waste of potential because they could have got a lot more out of this if he was alive and they did it. I will go over that and what they could have done with this little story thread if it was a thing. Oh, and if Oscar had his parents leave, it would have actually been a cool thing for him to connect with Ruby over, by the way, if he ever talked about that. Being able to say to Ruby that he also has a story where his dad was gone before he was born and never knew him, just like Ruby's mother left and never came back. They could have connected over that, but that's not happening apparently. And yeah, obviously Oscar Pine. See, that's easily the mother's or family's last name. She may not have even known Hazel's last name or simply just passed on her family name since he wasn't around, so that's not a plot hole either. But if this were to have been the case, that genetically he's also Oscar Rainart, then that would have opened up the opportunity for some complexity and wrinkles to the Hazel story. Because unfortunately, now he's Ash, his story didn't really round out very well. He had a cool moment to go out on for sure, and people really liked that moment, and that's fine. But the story was pretty unconvincing and thin for a lot of people. It just needed some more meat on it. Because, as I see it, you have everything happen the same way up until Volume 8. There's nothing you need to change. But once you get to Volume 8, you use Oscar's torture scenes to flesh this out. That, after being beaten senseless and taking the punishment, have the talk with Oz that confirms it is Oscar taking the beating rather than letting Oz through for the same reason he says. And rather than Oscar being just totally down and taking the punches and being sort of okay with it, play into the fact he's a kid and have him crack. Not give up the password, that's the one thing he's hanging on to, but have him break down and start crying. It would make these scenes hurt even more if he wasn't just taking it. He just starts crying and breaking down, sobbing. He's resigned himself to death and pain. Hazel, of course, really doesn't like this. He doesn't really want to be doing this. He hates the Oz part, but we see his conflicted feelings even in the show where Oscar is concerned. And Oscar, yeah, just starts crying and breaking down and making him feel worse. So, seeing this crack and not wanting to continue with it too much further, Hazel tries to press his advantage here and says to tell him already. Tell him the password so this can stop. Oscar, of course, won't tell, and Hazel hits him again. Very uncomfortable to hit a openly crying, weeping child now. Oscar, now sobbing, simply starts apologizing and saying his goodbyes to everyone. He's just cracked. None of the people he's speaking to are here, of course. He just has nothing left and he starts just sobbing to himself. He's given up on life and mournfully starts reciting names, babbling, "I'm sorry, RWBY, I wasn't strong enough. I don't want to die. I'm sorry, Mom, I miss you. I'm sorry." Basically, he just starts having a Rambo moment if you've seen the end of First Blood. And in his breakdown, he says that he wished none of this had happened and he could just go home to Mistral and work in the fields on their farms and see his aunt insert name here, and things of that nature. And Hazel, who was about to hit him, freezes. He asks Oscar to keep talking, and he screams he doesn't know the stupid password, and Hazel stops him and says no, tell him more about his home. He presses for details about what he wants to go back to. And here is where Oscar goes into detail about where he lives and his aunt's name and his mum's name, etc. Crafted a little better than this, put some time into the dialogue, but just in summary. And through this, Hazel has some realization coming over him. There's an odd look in his face, as in he probably knows those names or something's ringing a bell. The description of the farm, the aunt's name, perhaps the mum's name, etc. You then have Hazel in a roundabout way get Oscar's age, so saying like his father left X number of years ago would be his age, etc, etc. Don't make it too obvious to your audience, but that's the general point. And at the point where he's asking questions, Oscar is only guarding the password. It's the last thing he's guarding, so he answers pretty much whatever he gets asked. And he asks about Oscar's father, and Oscar says he never knew him. And Hazel's eyes narrow and he leaves for now. When he comes back later, Oscar springs his plan, that this time he tells Hazel the password and gives him the choice, so we still get that same beat. Then you could do this a bunch of different ways. You'd have to restructure the end a bit, because at this point you probably have the audience catching on that this could be a thing. So it could be one of the things he might possibly ask Jin when they open it up. Perhaps he does ask, with or without Oscar, and comes back with the answer, or Oscar learns the answer at the same time. But that would mean redoing the lamp theft, where perhaps Neo didn't know it had already been used, but then the audience would know, so you'd have to play with how you structured it a bit. And honestly, Cinder doesn't need that question to figure out what's going on. You could have just had Watts listen in and hear most of it, which is what they implied he did anyway, so again, we're not losing anything by not using the question there. Or perhaps you could do the story where Oscar's mother wasn't just a one-night stand as much as she was an occasional drop-in visit for Hazel whenever he was passing through the area over a few years, so perhaps the name means more to him, he knows the family names a bit better, and he's a little bit more sure of the result of what he's getting at, so then that wouldn't require the use of Jin. Hazel is just able to connect the dots himself. Or I think perhaps my favorite is that Jin just gives it up for free, sort of. Not a free question where they ask her anything, but she just makes a comment on their resemblance, or it's nice that they finally met, or something along those lines when she's summoned just because she can, perhaps just to throw a wrinkle out there, because it doesn't actually defy what she's programmed to do. She has given out some free information before, and if she thinks it'll help her situation, she might throw it in there, who knows. I don't pretend to know the motivations completely and the limitations of Jin, but I do think that would be funny if she just sort of chucks it out there and sees what they do with it, without being in so many words. Perhaps even playing into the, "Oh, it's nice you had a reunion again," and then Hazel says, "I'm not happy to see Oz," or something like that, and she was like, "Oh, that's not what I meant," and then sort of lets it sit, But what you do with that is actually, no matter how it goes, you jog Hazel's emotional state. You flash back to Haven with him realizing that at that fight, it was technically his own family defending Gretchen's actions and choices towards him. You then also have the fact that he's been beating up and torturing his own son. You can have him look at the marks all over his face and the wounds he's caused him in the moment. That he's facing family he never knew he had through no fault of his own, but still he was never there for him. But also you have this increase of the burning hate of Ozpin. He still hates him even more, because now he's literally taking away not just another kid, but another member of his family, and he's doing it personally. It doesn't matter if it's a choice to Hazel at that point. And while you might say Hazel's turn in the show is somewhat selfless, as it isn't motivated by a close relation, and instead was simply trying to stop Salem for the right reasons, it actually kind of feels out of character they did that. That swing was very quick. Despite people sometimes not liking the fact he went bad because of the reasons he did and his own reasoning, it would actually fit his character more if the reason he changed was along the same lines. It fit his reasoning. It more completes him as a character that people who questioned his very narrow path to destruction over Gretchen, he's then pulled out by his just as flimsy connection to another family member who is Oscar. At least he's then consistent. It also means that despite his hatred of Oz, this is literally his chance to save his relative from a fate like Gretchen's, which is a strong motivator to get Oscar out. While Hazel can't make up for what he's been doing to his son at all, he can help him escape. He can give him one thing, and give his life for it. In fact, if you did it the way where Oscar wasn't privy to this information yet until the fight happens, you could even reveal it there, where you simply add one word to Hazel's line. Instead of grabbing Salem and saying, "Do it," he grabs Salem, looks at Oscar in the eye and says, "Do it, son." And then, too late, he has to do it, the thing's firing, bang. And then that deeper personal connection with just the idea of family works for someone like Hazel. Someone who legitimately thinks they have nothing left to lose and list into darkness. Someone consumed by thoughts of revenge at what is gone. Who then discovers they have one thing left that they could lose, one thing left that matters to them. And then, equally, being unwilling to lose that too, and it pulls them back out of the darkness to do one great heroic act at the end. And thematically, it also plays into Hazel's protective nature of Mercury and Emerald. Yes, that comes from protecting him like he wishes he did for his sister. We've said that before, it's pretty observable. But it's also very easy to notice and feels like a surrogate father situation when those moments happen, and lots of people feel the same. It does read like a protective surrogate father motivation a lot of the time. So, if that was the case, that would then leave Oscar with this weird situation and information, but Hazel is gone. And just like as it happened in Volume 8, he equally gave himself up for Emerald at the same time. It wasn't just Oscar, it was Emerald as well, he does the same nod. And then things get weird but interesting with a link between Oscar and Emerald. Oscar just found out he had a dad, or who his dad was, and killed him, which is pretty confronting. But also he was a bad guy, so that's conflicting, and also he was angry at Oz, who's in his own head, so that's conflicting. But also he has a connection with Emerald because Emerald in her time was almost fathered by Hazel for a short period of time and protected. It's just a weird connection, but you could put it there and it adds more meat to basically all the situations going on. The protective father figure amongst the bad guys for Emerald was the actual but never present father for Oscar. It just gives this weird little wrinkle and link to play with, especially since those two are going to be around each other moving forwards through the volume. And look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Hazel's dead, they're not really looking that deep into Oscar, it doesn't seem like, or especially Emerald. But without changing much at all, you could have had some better motivation to pull Hazel back to the good side and complete his story at the end. An added reason for his self-sacrifice, more complexity with his emotions and Oscar's emotions, having to kill his father even though he never knew him, filling in a blank on Oscar's past that's there very unnecessarily for the audience, adding to the themes of Hazel's loss and family, and saving children as well, adding to the complexity and anger that Oz would end up with Oscar. Which also I'd like to stop here and say is something you could have played with a lot more if you did this reveal like volumes ago. If you wanted to totally restructure the plot, that Hazel knows this a lot longer, just think about it. What if Hazel discovered this connection before Volume 8, and it's become like a Luke and Vader situation for a few volumes where they both are aware of each other? That's also really possible. I just don't have the time and resources to plot it all out right now for you, unfortunately. But also it gives the same link between Emerald and Oscar they could discuss, and it helps with another layer of Hazel's presence in the story at all. Like I said, he's become a bit of a pet project for me, wishing there was more to him, especially now he's gone and seemingly it's over. One thing is just from a writing standpoint, like as someone who likes writing, I really can't believe they resisted the urge, honestly, to have it that Oz is merging with the only other living relative Hazel has, putting him in danger and ruining his life, if not taking it away again. It's so juicy, there's so much there, it would have been great. I really do wish there was a version where in like volume 6 or 7 they work this out, and then they meet in the whale like it was the Death Star, and they try and sway each other to the respective sides. Son, come over to the evil side, there's no reason. Father, no, do good, etc. Burning hatred from Hazel at the presence of Oz still being there, ruining things between them and ruining his life. Then you get those same classic beats, and he also dies to protect his son, and the big bad guy is foiled, though only temporarily, which he also weirdly ended up happening in Star Wars. How did this line up so well? But it was terrible there, at least here it was set up that Salem comes back, so that's alright. But Hazel realizing he had this extended family, Emerald by circumstance and Oscar by blood, would have been a cool sweet moment for him before he went out. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble on it anymore, especially won't go into like multi-volume things that definitely didn't happen. It was just something I wanted to talk about. It's a theory, if you'd like to call it that. A theory slash thing they could have done that I think would have been cool and fitting that perhaps still might be a thing even though there's not much to do with it now. I have a few others of these I might look into if you guys like this one. If talking about things that didn't happen is something you actually place any value in or not. If not though, and this ends up just being a one-off, this is still the one I wanted to put out the most of the bunch. especially if they do reveal that Hazel is Oscar's father, because I still want the points for calling it if so. But again, real quick, if you like this, please let me know with the like button, and let me know your thoughts on this idea and these what could have been video concepts if they interest you at all. And until next time, my name is Rigger, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.